Welcome back, everyone, to AuthorStory. I am your host, Alexander Lim, and our guest is Kari O'Driscoll, who is the author of One Teenager at a Time, Developing Self-Awareness and Critical Thinking in Adolescence, which you can check out by clicking on the Amazon link in the video description below. Kari takes pride in being called a tree-hugging, granola-eating idealist, and spends her time writing about such subjects as social justice, parenting, food, and mindfulness. So, Kari, welcome to Author Story. Thank you very much for being with us.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So, first off, for starters, a little bit about yourself. Writing. Was this something you always did as a child?
I think so. Yeah. It
Okay.
wasn't anything I was ever really aspiring to be. When I was a kid, I never said, I want to grow up and be a writer, but
Okay.
it definitely is the sort of default way I have always gotten my message across. It's how I process the world.
Mm, okay. So, all right. I know you have degrees in biology and philosophy, and that you also work in healthcare, but the kind of writing that's done in such fields occurs to me as being different from the right kind of writing you do today, sort of like the difference between essentially an academic type of writing and blogging. How do you get into
hmm
becoming the writer that you presently are?
I think it was, I was pretty fascinated by the difference, honestly, when I was in
Mm,
college between biology and philosophy. I
mhm,
had always thought that I was going to go into science. I really loved science and math.
mhm,
And I went to a liberal arts college, which sort of forced me to take other kinds of classes.
mhm,
And it wasn't very long before I realized the power of being able to understand scientific concepts, but write about them in a way that was more accessible to other people
mm,
in like philosophy and the arts and things like that. So I think that really, because I love people and I love advocating for people
mhm,
and I love trying to kind of explain things to people, that became my sweet spot of
mm,
processing the scientific academic kinds of things and figuring out a way to translate them for
mhm.
people who didn't necessarily think that way.
All right, okay. And I guess I mean it's also kind of like going as green. I mean, when I think philosopher, I think of some old guy in his 60s, long beard, white hair and that sort of thing, talking about things that, that he'd run circles around me with what he talks about. But that's not really the case, is it? As far as you're
it
concerned.
really it really isn't. I mean, I think for me philosophy was more about curiosity. It was more
Mm,
about science was always this like there is a right answer, and
right,
if we
right.
just keep plugging away in the right formulas, we're going to get to that right answer. And the thing that's appealing to me about philosophy is that it's more curiosity driven in a way where we get to ask lots and lots and lots of questions and realize that even if we get to an answer,
Mm-hmm.
it might actually just lead us to more questions.
Mm,
And so it becomes sort of, for me, it was fun. It's like this fun journey of like wondering about, well, why is that? And how do other people feel about that?
right,
So,
right,
I mean, there definitely is some of that, old man with a beard sort of stuff going on in philosophy. But the other
right.
thing about philosophy that's fascinating is that it's really concerned with ethical and moral questions as well. And that's the piece of it that I really leaned toward.
Okay, okay. So moving on to the present, the Self Project. You founded this in 2015, and I believe its purpose is to share an adolescent social, emotional health curriculum with education parents. So now, before we get into that, I'd just like to ask, how did you get into founding Self in the first
Um,
place?
yeah, it was really, again, not anything that I had planned on. I had, with my background in working in healthcare, I also worked for the state of Washington's mental health division
Mhm,
um, and advocated for families of children with mental health issues. And then I had two children of my own.
mhm,
And I really started to notice what was happening on a formal level in school and what kinds of things were missing. And so I founded the Self Project as a way to fill that gap of what I
mhm,
think is missing for kids, especially in the United States, with regard to being educated about things that they're not being taught about in school.
Okay, okay. So next, the Self Project. Can you give us a short description of what it is and what it's all about?
Sure. It's really, it is rooted in what we know about adolescent brain development
Mm-hmm.
and what we know about how mindfulness impacts health and brain development.
Mm-hmm.
And it also uses ideas from nonviolent communication techniques. And really, the purpose of it is to just help kids who are in those teenage years, which I pretty liberally describe anywhere from 10 years old to about 24 or 25 years old, because that's really when this massive brain development is occurring.
Mm-hmm.
It's designed to help them understand how to ask questions about who they are and what their values are, and how to create really strong, trusting relationships and community, how to build networks that they know that they can rely on, and then how to develop patterns within themselves to help deal with stress and anxiety and to create a really positive mindset so that as they go forward into adulthood, they have a really solid foundation to stand on.
Right, right. So it occurs to me then that this is somewhat, the approach is, well, not no surprise, a bit philosophical in the approach, but it also has a real world impact.
Yes, absolutely. And it is very grounded in the most recent science about adolescent brain development. So, for example, we know that kids this age are very socially driven. We know that they are biologically designed to take really big risks, which is terrifying if you're a parent of a teenager. We know that that they're not able to really think through the consequences of their actions. And we can use all of those things to help them become stronger, healthier adults.
Okay, okay. And it's interesting to speak of this because, I mean, you did mention that this sprang from some things that you saw that were missing in the present educational system. What is
Mm-hmm.
uh, what is so in the present educational system that that this sort of development, this sort of thing is missing?
I mean, I think unfortunately, especially in the United States, we've bought into this idea of competition and, that there are certain prescribed paths that
Hmm.
all kids should take.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, we keep piling on more stress, and you have to get this score on your SATs, you need to have this many extracurricular activities, you need to have picked something that you're specializing at, or do you have to know what you want to go to college for by the
Right.
time you're a sophomore in high school. I mean, there's this, and the requirements, the core requirements to graduate from high school or to move from one grade to the next are very driven by outside forces. And what's missing is we don't teach kids to stop and really understand what drives them internally. Like, why should this be important to me? Or is this important to me? And how do I feel about it? And we're also not taking into account their personal emotional development.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, I mean, I think that there's been this thought where that's the parent's job.
Hmm.
But when you spend 40 or 50 or 60 hours a week away from your parents with other peers
Right.
doing things, you can't just put that emotional development on hold and then
Right.
come home and get it all done over a family dinner a couple times a week.
Right.
you know?
Right. Right. Okay. 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 So you did mention that there are biological changes that take place between 10 to 25. Can you just,
Mhm.
can you just give our listeners a short summary of the kind of changes that do take place in this during these ages?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, the first thing that starts to happen is that, and every parent knows this, you can see kids moving from being able to understand only concrete things, black and white, right and wrong,
Right.
1 + 1 is 2, to being able to understand more abstract concepts. And that that's an opportunity for us to help nurture that curiosity and help them understand, oh, the world is bigger than me, and it's not all about right and wrong, and there are some gray areas. The second thing that happens is there's a portion of our brain called the amygdala, which is these two little tiny almond-shaped structures on either side of the brain that drive our emotions. They drive our sort of fear response, our fight or flight response. And during those adolescent years, those structures are physically swollen to 3 times their normal size, which means that everything that comes through the adolescent brain is filtered through an emotional filter first. And that's why you can see someone, crying over a bad haircut like it's the end of the world. That's why you can have somebody come home and be absolutely enraged because their best friend decided not to sit with them at lunch. And as an adult, we go, really? Get over yourself. That's not a big deal. But it is a big deal because literally, biologically, their brain is telling them this is survival, this is fight or flight. And then the third piece of that is the portion of our brain that's kind of right behind our forehead called the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed in human beings until we're about 25. And unfortunately, that's the portion of the brain that gives us rational thought, that helps us say, okay, wait a minute, how am I going to solve this problem I'm finding myself in? Or how am I going to get out of this situation? Or how did I even get here and how do I learn from it? We're physically not capable of making those kinds of rational thoughts and decisions until we're about 25 years old. So that's sort of the perfect storm of why teenagers are teenagers. And I think the reason that it's important to know that as educators and parents is because if we're telling kids, oh, chill out, it is not a big deal. Right. Or why can't you just be grown up? Why can't you just make a grown up decision? Why can't you see that was a stupid choice? They actually can't. They're not capable of it. They don't have the physical ability to make those choices yet. So it's our job to help develop those practices and patterns for them.
Okay. And I just like to do a little maybe sidetrack a little here because I'm aware of, there are quite a few adults who are, they still act like teenagers, emotional, whiny, self-centered, what we call self-centered anyway.
Right.
Would this have anything to do with, I don't know how to call this, failure to develop and start part of their brain, or is their amygdala going nuts?
Sure.
What's going on here? Would you know?
So the way that our brains develop is that during those adolescent years, we are, for lack of a better word, sort of pruning the tree of neural connections. So our brains are going, okay, I'm going to go into my adult life and I need to be efficient and effective. So I need to figure out which of these neural connections and habits and pathways are not useful anymore, and which ones are the ones I'm going to rely on to just carry me through. We all have things that we do without thinking, right? Habitual responses that we have to certain things. And those are things that we created when we were in those adolescent years. So for those folks who have those kinds of patterns, where they're not very emotionally intelligent, likely what has happened is that during those adolescent years, they pruned off or weren't able to develop the kinds of neural connections that would help them be emotionally intelligent. And instead, they further reinforced those ones that are just habits, right? That are selfish or that are petty, or you have this knee-jerk response that's either violent or you curl into a ball in a corner when something scary happens, right? And I call those SuperHighways, right? What we do, our brains are driven to be efficient. And so where we continue to do the same things over and over and over again, we create SuperHighways, which is why I think this book is so important, because if we can be intentional as adults in helping our kids create superhighways with mindfulness and with self-awareness and with critical thinking, then when they get into their late 20s and 30s and 40s and they're faced with a difficult situation, those are the responses that they're going to be instantly going to without even thinking about it. Oh, okay, I remember what this felt like to be freaked out. And I remember I can breathe and calm down and know that this isn't a catastrophe. And in a couple minutes, I'll be thinking clearly enough to handle it. So we have to help them develop those neural pathways in their brain. Otherwise, we do get adults that are constantly in fight flight mode because those are the pathways that they developed in their brains for a decade when they were adolescents.
Okay, okay. So it occurs to me then that you did quite a bit of research then to create this curriculum to bring to the fore. So I take it then you dealt with like experts or expert opinions in various fields like psychology and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I worked for several years with the state of Washington Mental Health Division in their children's long-term inpatient psychiatric programs, and I had some amazing coworkers that were just really amazing at working with adolescents and their families. I love to read. Reading is one of my favorite things. And so I've spent a lot of time looking at the work of folks like Dr. Dan Siegel, folks for the Center for Healthy Minds at Yale, lots of different, going to different conferences and learning from folks at Mindful Schools, to really just kind of understand how we can impact the adolescent. There's so much stress, there's so much anxiety, there's so many things we're asking them to do. And this is the last time in our lives where our brains and our personalities are really developing at an astonishing rate.
Right.
And it just feels like the right place to sort of dig in and see what we can do to make things better.
Right. Okay. So on to the self project, essentially the curriculum in the self project. You did mention essentially general goals, general objectives. Now, how does this curriculum, how's it work? I mean, it still seems a little bit vague to me, and definitely, I know it's definitely different from the standard curriculum like in high school and college, but how does it work? How's it structured?
So there are different subject areas, and within each subject area, there are a multitude of lessons. So the subject areas are mindfulness, compassion, positive mindset, self-worth, and then stress, anxiety, and fear. And within each lesson, they all start with story, because human beings love story, and it's a great way to hook someone's attention. And it's a very short story, and then it leads into a guided discussion or facilitated discussion. And so the curriculum is really designed to be used with multiple adolescents at a time. And the reason for that is because we want to harness their desire. They're very socially driven. We want to harness their desire to be social and to have conversations. We also want to normalize conversations about difficult things, right? We don't often give kids those opportunities to really grapple with something that maybe there isn't a right or a wrong answer.
Right.
So there's an opportunity for them to have sort of a discussion where everybody gets to say, wait a minute, that's not my experience. Here's what I think, or here's what I know. And then there's an activity that goes along with that. In some cases, it's a solo activity like journaling or maybe doing an art project or, something. In some cases, it's more of a combined activity, really just to sort of, so that for the kids who are more physical learners, the kids who learn better when they're getting up and moving around, that they can actually put some of these ideas into practice. And then the final piece of the curriculum is a guided meditation or guided visualization that really allows them to sort of get the ideas or the questions at least sort of deep into their bones. And so each of the content areas has multiple lessons that are designed to do this kind of work. It's very flexible. It's something that can be done over a period of time. So, for example, I did a pilot project with a school in Arkansas where the kids had homeroom. And so on Monday in homeroom, we would do the story and the discussion. And then on Wednesday in homeroom, we would have them circle back around and say, did anybody sleep on this? Do you have different ideas? Are there things that occurred to you that hadn't before? And then we would do the activity. And then on Friday, we would come back and we would do the guided visualization and then sort of a debrief of the entire lesson. I did another pilot project in a different school in Seattle where we did the entire lesson in one 75-minute session. So there's a lot of flexibility built into how you can do this, but it all draws on mindfulness and nonviolent communication and what we know about the adolescent brain as a way to hook teenagers in and really get them engaged.
Right. And how long does covering, say, the entire curriculum take? Does it take something like 1 year? Does it take something like, or it's more like a seminar, like 3 or 4 days and that's it?
I would encourage folks to do it over the course of several months at least, or a school year, because again, these are difficult. Some of these are difficult concepts. Some of them are tricky. Some of them are things that we're not used to talking to kids about or letting them talk to each other about. And I think the more we give them time to really think about and ruminate on the different concepts, the better and the richer the discussions are going to be. So there are about 50 different lessons in there. So if you did, one a week or a couple a week, it could definitely take you through an entire school year, or a year. If you're a family that has multiple adolescents, you could do one at the dinner table or something once a week and stretch it out for a year.
Okay. So I guess it's a little early given that this program has only been around for 4 years. But do you see any sorts of improvements with some of the kids that you've been working with?
I've gotten some really great feedback from kids. The school that I worked with in Seattle is called the Recovery School, and it's an alternative public high school for kids who have addiction history. And it was a fabulous group of students to work with. They were really, they just were very real and they were very raw. And I think one of the great things, or one of the things that they really liked about the curriculum, was that they felt heard. It wasn't, we weren't sitting in a group talking about your addiction issues. I was curious, talk to me about, when do you find it hard to have compassion? Are there people that you naturally have compassion for easily, and other kids that, or, people in your life that you go, yeah, no, I got no compassion for you. And that's not a bad thing. Let's just discuss it. Are there patterns? And so they could really dig into those kinds of questions. And as a facilitator, I talk very little, unlike this interview. I let them talk. And I had one student come up to me after one session and say, I don't think I've ever had anybody listen to me for that long and not have it be about my addiction or my bad behavior. And that was really cool. And so I think those are the kinds of impacts, and it doesn't necessarily, it's not measurable, it's not something we can put on an SAT score or a college transcript. I had another student who came up to me after one of the guided meditations we did, and he just was crying, and he said, that was so cool. I've never felt like that before. And so it's those kind of interactions. I think giving kids a space to really sort of take a mini vacation from the multitasking and all of the things that they're expected to do in any given day, and play and be curious and relax their brains, I think over time has an enormous impact. You see these kids 9 or 10 months later after having gone through the curriculum feeling more self-assured, feeling like they have a right to speak up because someone has listened to them before, and so they know that their voice is important. And just being a little easier in their own skin. And to me, that's a huge win. Again, it's hard to quantify,
Right, right, right,
but I think it's impactful.
right. Okay, okay. So, just an example, because you did mention there were some topics that are difficult for
Hmm.
teenagers to speak about. Can you give one example of one such topic, just so our listeners can get a handle on what exactly is going on here?
Sure. There's the whole chapter on self-worth,
Hmm.
right? And so there's a section in there on shame.
Hmm.
And it, really, kids are encouraged to sort of explore different ideas of shame
Hmm.
and think about when they have felt shame, um, and who it is in their lives
Hmm.
that that gives them that sort of feeling. Like, when, has anybody ever said to you, you should be ashamed of yourself, or, how dare you, how could you, what kind of a person are you? Those are really uncomfortable feelings, and they're definitely uncomfortable situations to talk about with your peers, especially if you want your peers to think you're cool.
Right, right.
um, so that sort of exploring that and unpacking that, if we can get over the hurdle of like, are you kidding me, I don't want to talk about that,
Right, right.
you know to really letting it out into the light. I think that's one of those things that is super powerful, especially if you're an adolescent whose parents or teachers or people in power routinely use shame
Hmm.
to manage your behavior.
Hmm.
And if you know that you're, yeah, I'm going to talk about this and I'm going to have some new ideas about it, and then I'm going to go home and this person's probably still going to treat me that way,
Right, right.
that, that's a really powerful thing to grapple with, I think.
Right. Okay, okay, I got that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, Karen, let's say you came across someone who knows a teenager, it could be a parent, it could be maybe just a relative or a friend of a teenager, an older friend of a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
and they can't really quite get a handle on this guy, like there's something that's kind of missing with how they perceive the teenager to be. And you had only enough time to tell that person one thing about what it's like to be a teenager. What would be that
Mm.
one thing you would tell
Um, I think what I would do is just point out what teenagers are being asked to do and be in any given day
them?
is
Right.
more than any of the rest of us is being asked to do. They're being asked to grow up. They're they're being asked to do things that they're physically actually not capable of yet because their brains are not there.
Hmm.
Um, they are being asked to, check all these boxes in school and maybe have a job, and they're learning how to navigate new relationships, and they're being biologically driven to separate from their parents. And I mean, if you look at all of the emotional and social and logistical obligations that teenagers are tasked with in any given day, it's a wonder they're even upright.
Right.
And so if we can lead with compassion and curiosity and offer ourselves as adults who are supportive and loving, then we're going to go a long way toward creating positive relationships. But if we're suspicious of them and they never meet the mark in our minds,
Hmm.
then we're not going to create strong, stable, loving relationships. If what we want is good, trusting relationships, we need to give them unconditional positive regard. We need to assume good intent, and we need to really give them the benefit of the doubt and ask what we can do to support them.
Okay, 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 I got that. Okay. So, Karen, the last minute or so of this interview, are there any last words of wisdom you'd like to share, maybe to inspire listeners or make them think?
We all know what it was like to be a teenager. We all know how hard it was. I think it's even harder now. I think this current generation of teenagers is facing so much more than we ever were. And I think leading with curiosity and compassion and humor is the key, and listening, because, as soon as we start listening, they start feeling like they're being heard. And that's really, really important.
Okay, well, great words of wisdom right there. Great, fantastic. Okay, then. So, in closing, the book is One Teenager at a Time Developing Self Awareness and Critical Thinking in Adolescence. The author is our guest, Kari O'Driscoll, and you can find her book on Amazon. So, Kari, thank you very much for being an author story. I must say it was a very enlightening conversation for me.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was really fun to be here.
You're welcome. So everyone, check out One Teenager at a Time and go ahead and subscribe to our channel to check out not only all the great authors and books past, present, future which are on and who will be on our channel. So catch you all next time on Author Story with another author and their fantastic book.